Hello and welcome. How do Western powers tackle the tricky challenge of intervening in Libya without facing a backlash in the Arab world? The United States and its allies are still contending with the dark cloud lingering over the questionable military campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, making any prospect of action in Libya that much harder. Well, Libyan rebels around the country continue to fight government forces, but Muammar Gaddafi shows no signs of relenting and has continued to meet dissent with an iron fist. As the violence continues, the US and its NATO allies have dithered on a decision to impose a no-fly zone over Libya, which would be patrolled by military aircraft with the authority to shoot down Gaddafi's air defenses. France has taken the first decisive step by recognizing the rebel Libyan National Council as the legitimate representative of the people. And President Nicolas Sarkozy has now met with leading members from the group. Muammar Gaddafi has responded by breaking diplomatic relations with France. So today we ask, how should the international community respond to Libya's increasingly brutal attacks against opposition groups? Remember, you can join our conversation with your emails or text messages in the show. Joining me now from Paris is one of France's most renowned writers, philosopher and activist, Bernard-Henri Lévy. He's published more than 30 best-selling books, including Left in Dark Times, A Stand Against the New Barbarism, and American Vertigo, Traveling America in the Footsteps of Tocqueville. He has reported from hotspots around the world, including Bosnia, Lebanon and Darfur, and recently returned from Libya. Mr. Lévy, it's good to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here too.
Sir, I want to start by asking you what made you go to Libya in the first place. What was your goal in making that trip?
My goal was, as I did so many times in my life, to witness with my own eyes, to see what really happens on the ground, and to see the extent of the bloodbath, of the violence, of the violation of human rights, basic human rights by Muammar Gaddafi's regime. I wanted to see that and to be a witness when I would be back in Europe or in America.
Well, sir, of course, the news coming out now is that France has recognized the Libyan rebels in the form of the Libyan National Council, and I wonder what impact that's likely to have, you think, on the position of the rebels, and perhaps also how France might regard the idea of intervention now.
First of all, I'm very proud that France did that today, this morning. I attended the meeting between President Sarkozy and the three representatives of the National Council of Free Libya. I was there and I was really impressed by what happened there, by the words of the emissary of Mr. Abdel-Jalil, by the words of President Sarkozy, and I am happy and proud that my country is the first one to admit the evidence, which is that Gaddafi is no longer able to govern, to represent legitimately the people of Libya. When one kills his own people, when one responds to demonstration by sending some planes to bomb the demonstrators, he is out of the game. And this morning I sat near three gentlemen who were really dignified representatives of the Libyan people.
I have to ask one thing, that there are those who believe that this may have been a slightly, well, they cynically believe, I guess, that President Sarkozy was doing this for popularity, considering his ratings have slumped as low as the 30% mark.
I'm not sure, you know, that he will gain a lot of popularity with that. France is a very cautious country. You have in my country, unfortunately, a strong anti-Muslim feeling or even a racist feeling. And I'm not sure that to involve in the affairs of Libya will provide so much popularity to Sarkozy. No, I believe, you know, I'm so often hostile myself to Sarkozy. I'm opposed to his politics on so many grounds. I voted against him and I will vote probably against him next time too. But I must admit that on this case, he was just okay and even great. On this case, one has to be honest, even if you oppose democratically to a president, you must admit when it is daylight that it is daylight. This morning, Nicolas Sarkozy, without having so much to win, had the great and the good and the right political gesture. And I think that he changed completely the pattern of our policy toward the Arab world. What was called before the Arab policy of France meant in reality friendship with dictators, meant in reality friendship with the states with no consideration of the nation or the peoples. Today, maybe we see the beginning of a new policy based on friendship between peoples, based on consideration of what the regime are in depth and not only in face value. Today we are maybe facing the beginning of a policy where to be the friend of the Arab world will not mean to be the friend of Mubarak, of Ben Ali, these thieves, these thugs, or the friend of Gaddafi, this hooligan, and this crazy fool guy. So it was an important moment which happened in the history of the relationship between Europe and the Arab world this morning in Paris, and I'm very proud to have been involved in a way in this story.
Well, Monsieur Lévy, before I ask you more about your trip to Libya, let me ask you one quick thought. I don't know if you heard, the Libyan media is saying that they have information, a dark secret about Mr. Sarkozy, and that it could be information that would cause his leadership to fall. Have you heard about this?
What is the credibility of an information coming from this bouffon of Mr. Gaddafi? He's a clown, he's a bouffon, a bloody clown. This guy who thinks that Sardaigne belongs to France. This guy who pretends that Al-Qaida is behind the freedom fighters of Libya. This man has no credibility. Whatever he says, it will have no importance. He's just a crazy Neron, an illiterate Neron, the Roman emperor. What he will say has no importance. I'm not so sure we should bother your viewers with that.
Well, a number of our viewers wrote in, of course, with emails for you, sir, as we have an interactive show here. So I'll put an email we got to you, if I may, that came in from a viewer by the name of Zahir Ahmed, who wrote in about the no-fly zone. He says, the idea of US intervention is chilling, but the killing of Libyans must be stopped. A no-fly zone through a UN decision seems to be the right thing to do. Now, of course, France is looking for UN mandated, validity to go through and create a new no-fly zone. The European Commission has just, advocated that. But do you think that will give it enough credibility to take intervention?
I'm sure of. I went to Libya in order to listen and in order to learn. I went to Libya with a very humble and modest way of approaching the problem. I went there to learn and to listen. What I heard is two things. Number one, please don't steal our revolution. Please don't put your hands off the Libyan revolution. You French had your revolution 2 centuries ago. You achieved it by yourself. We must achieve by ourselves our revolution. This is point number one. Point number two, all the Libyan I met, people, average people of the street, youngsters, users of Facebook and Twitter before it was cut, and a representative like Mr. Abdel Jalil or Mr. Goga, said also, point number two, that there is just one thing they cannot do alone. One thing, which is to neutralize, to prevent the functioning of the 3 military airports from where the planes of the death of Gaddafi take off. This, they cannot alone do it. And they ask to the international community, under an international umbrella, under the umbrella of United Nations Or maybe you have other umbrellas than United Nations. You have the Arab League, you have the African Union, you have many solutions which would provide a legitimacy to a very limited, a very targeted strike in defense of the civilians and of course not against the civilians, which would put Mr. Gaddafi out of the game. This is the only goal today. Right. All the Libyans I met during these days had one concern. Gaddafi must be put out of the game, whatever is the cost for him. No, of course, not for the Libyan people.
Right. Now, interesting, you talk about the hands-off sentiment, because from Tunisia, we had an email from a Libyan who's living in Tunisia. Reem Tweleb wrote in saying, I think the West's role should be limited to punishing Gaddafi, helping Libyans restore their stolen wealth, and recognizing the new Libyan National Assembly. Military action must be taken by Arab nations. That echoes very much what you just said, Monsieur Lévy. Now, Syria has announced that it wants no military intervention from outside the region as well. I wonder how you think the dynamic between the East and the West will change. You mentioned this previous relationship with dictators. How do you think that the East and West balance will emerge?
First point about the military intervention, one detail. I wrote a piece in the Huffington Post last week saying the following: why not, at the end of the day, you have in the Arab world one very powerful army which is well equipped, powerful, which achieved the beginning of a real revolution, which is the Egyptian army. Why should we not imagine or conceive that the Egyptian people push its army to go to help and to give the hand to the Libyan brothers? After all, when we made the French Revolution in 1789, the French people, we had the desire, and we did it, to push the values of the French Revolution outside the borders to our neighbors. I dream of an Egypt who would push the conquest of its so fresh revolution outside toward, for example, Libya. So we could absolutely conceive these strikes on Sirte, airport of Sirte. There is not 10, not even 5, maybe 2 or 3 targets. Sirte, from where the fighters of Gaddafi depart, Sama, where the mercenaries of Niger, Chad, and elsewhere arrive, and maybe the bunker of Gaddafi. This can be done by an Arab army. We have in Egypt one of the best armies of the world and of the area after Israel. In the area you have 2 strong armies, Israel and Egypt. We can hope, and I do hope, that Egypt will help his Libyan brothers by providing this armed, very limited intervention. About East and West, I think that we are breathing. I felt it in Libya. I smelt it in Egypt. I was in Egypt just before Libya. There is a new air. There is a new atmosphere. Everything has changed. The fall of the dictators have liberated something. We breathe differently in Egypt today and 1 year ago. I was in Egypt 1 year ago under Mubarak. It was not the same air. It was not the same freshness. It was not the same discussions. There will be debates, of course, between East and West, between our political tendencies, but democratic debates, and not with this terrible and heavy burden of the dictatorship.
Now, I wonder, Mr.
And
Lévy,
you will see how many problems will be solved in a much easier way.
Right. Now, I wonder, though, how much the people of the West, the Western countries, will be able to trust their leaderships when what they've seen over the past, 20, 30 years is relationships where governments have been enemies, then friends with, and then enemies, and then friends with again. France was one of the first countries in the mid-2000s to jump into doing business with Muammar Gaddafi again after he was rehabilitated, so to speak. So I wonder how that trust can be built, that governments won't just simply back more dictators and autocrats.
You know, what happens today under our eyes, in front of our eyes, goes beyond all calculations and all miscalculations. The intellectuals, as me, the journalist as you, the statesmen like Sarkozy, we are all overwhelmed by the new law. The new law is the law of the peoples. The people of Tunisia, the people of Egypt, the people of Libya now, they are putting the new law. It will be very difficult now to make blowjobs to dictators in the Arab world when we are a European government. It will be more and more difficult because the world has changed. This event is the first huge event of the 21st century. This wind of liberty, this trend of freedom in the Arab world, which was unconceivable, which was prospected by nobody, which was announced by no expert. We have so many experts of Islamology, none of them had previewed what is happening. This is the new law. The new rule of the game is that you will have some movements back and forth, of course, also. You will have some freezing of the revolution and then some warming again. But the new tendency goes in this sense, for one reason. The people of Tunisia, first one, we must not forget that, has no longer fear. And when the fear is out of the heads, it does not go back so easily. No fear in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya. In Libya, I was on the front line. I was in Benghazi. I saw these young boys who never, like in Bosnia 15 years ago, who had never a weapon in their hands, who did not even know how it works, but who, to defend their fatherland, to defend their families, and to defend the value which they embody now, they were ready to take the risk of death. When this happened to a people, there is no real movement back possible.
Do you think, Mr. Lévy, that there is a final decision on the outcome? Because there still seems to be uncertainty which way things are going to go. Egypt still hasn't stabilized. Tunisia, to a large degree, still hasn't fully stabilized. There's a fear that there will be a domino effect with this spreading across the region, across the Arab region, and perhaps even going wider and affecting other countries around the world. What is your view on that?
I think, first of all, in the three countries which you evoke, again, there can be some movements, of course, some crispations, some movements backward, but the real trend is onward. I believe that. Maybe I'm wrong. I pray that I am not, but I believe that the full trend, the deep trend, is forward, and that the liberty which has been conquered by these people, they will not resign, they will not abandon, they will not accept to drop it, whatever happens. Will there be a domino effect? I believe it also, of course. There will be, there was a thesis since a few weeks that there was an Arab exception. There was a thesis in the Western world. You saw that in the bullshit theory of Huntington and so on, that the Arab world was condemned to authoritarianism, that the Arab world was stranger to the idea of liberty and of individualism, that there was a sort of cultural contradiction and metaphysical opposition between the values of the individuality and the Arab culture. This has completely split out. There is nothing remaining of this stupid building of false concepts. This is over. This story is over. Ridiculous. I never bought this theory. And all my life, I did fight against this idea that democracy was good for these and not good for those, or that you had some religious landscapes which prevented you to reach enlightenment, and especially in Islam. I plead, since I am a Jew and I am a friend of Israel, but I plead since decades for not only the possibility but for the probability of an age of enlightenment in Islam. I say and I repeat since ages, when I was in Afghanistan, when I was in Pakistan, when I was in Algeria 10 years ago, in the most dark moment of the history of Algeria, when the Islamist commandos killed and raped the woman and the babies, I said that these obscurantist, fundamentalist and fanatics movements were the past. It was a past who took time to die, of course, and in the process of dying killed a lot, but that the future is an age of enlightenment. We are at this point. The enlightenment begins today in the Arab world, and then everything is possible. Democracy, peace, new relationship with Europe, new relationship with Israel, peace, and not only with Egypt, and so on. And I'm so happy of what is happening.
Well, Mr. Lévy, while I have you a couple of minutes left, I want to, of course, you have your fans and you have your critics. I want to put one email that came in from a viewer that is critical and give you a chance to address it. It's from Amin Yusen, who wrote in saying, Mr. Lévy is a guided missile at the hands of Israel's diplomatic apparatus, nothing more than a French version of AIPAC. After his activities on Iran's, quote, thirst for democracy, his involvement in Libya is deeply troubling. I wonder, when you face this kind of criticism about what your involvement is, how do you address that?
Number one, wrong information. If I am close to something, it is not to AIPAC, it is to J Street, because I am one of the founders of the French equivalent of J Street, which is J Cole. This is a point of information, but you are not obliged to know. I tell it to you. I am the agent of nobody. I am the agent of no diplomacy. I am a writer, a free spirit, and I am the agent of myself and what I believe to be the right and the truth. And sometimes, as these days, coming back from Libya, I feel, and it is for me a great honor, and a great honor. I feel the emissary of some women and men who allowed me to be the witness of their suffering, of their hope, and of their fight. And my only goal these days, when I met Nicolas Sarkozy 2 days ago, and I meet you today, when I meet you today, is to transmit, is to convey this message which I collected on the ground in Libya. This is the only way in which I allow myself to be an emissary. Of a diplomacy, never. Of a suffering, battling and resisting people, often. And in this case, Libya, of course.
Let me get one
Qaddafi
question.
Must, as we say in France, dégage. Dégage, go away, Qaddafi, as the Tunisians said to Ben Ali.
Well, Bernard-Henri Lévy, thank you very much for joining us. It was good to spend the time talking with you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Now, remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified of upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, the ripples of revolution. What chance is there that the Arab uprisings will trigger a thirst for greater freedoms in countries such as China, Cuba, and Myanmar? Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.